Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel, so if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land with ILTV, have no worries. It's time for our new show this week in Israel, where we'll give you the scoop on everything you need to know about the last 7 days right from Tel Aviv. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, here to keep you informed. U.S. Vice President Mike Pence continues his visit throughout Israel today. Though it's only a short trip, the vice president has already had a work meeting with Israeli President Reuven Rivlin today, and he's just visited Jerusalem's Western Wall. He'll be heading back to the United States tonight.
We are very proud, and I would like to thank you about your speech yesterday, about the strong, the warm, and the very special word that you used yesterday in our shrine of democracy, in our parliament, in our Knesset, at Jerusalem, the capital of the state of Israel.
The vice president's visit has ignited fanfare of all kinds. While some Israeli lawmakers, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, have hailed Pence as one of Israel's best friends, other Knesset members have been far less welcoming. Yesterday, MKs from the Arab Joint List boycotted Pence's address at the Knesset, calling his so-called messianic brand of Christianity dangerous to peace in the region.
We made a political protest. We, the third faction in the Knesset, said and sent a message to Vice President Pence and to the international community and to President Trump that we reject his policy. He is a very extreme vice president, especially the adaptation of the narrative of the occupation by the speech of Trump, which Pence was one of the pushers. That's why we are saying we want Israeli-Palestinian peace based on two-state solution and East Jerusalem as a capital.
Those lawmakers actually interrupted the Knesset's meeting by holding signs that read, quote, "Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine." Intense scuttles ensued and the lawmakers were escorted out of the Knesset. Though right-wing Knesset members have condemned this protest as disloyal to the Jewish state, the boycott does echo the feeling of millions of Christian Arabs in Israel, as well as the Palestinians who have refused to negotiate or even meet with Pence during his trip. Palestinians have brought East Jerusalem and the West Bank to near gridlock, boycotting Pence's mere presence.
اليوم إضراب شامل كل مؤسساتنا، كل محلاتنا التجارية، حتى اليوم 99% من السيارات كمان مضربة، حتى المدارس مضربة تلقائيا احتجاجا على زيارة بيزنس المنطقة.
Hamas has actually praised the Arab MKs for protesting Pence's speech. Some say a thumbs up from the terror group isn't exactly a good thing, but others point out that for Hamas to praise Israeli lawmakers for exercising their democratic right is quite a rare thing. Though the vice president was only here for 48 hours, this is probably a trip that he won't soon forget. Israel has just taken a stand at the United Nations, accusing the Human Rights Council of constant discrimination against the Jewish state and for alleged bias against Israel in favor of the Palestinians. ILTV's Aaron Porras is here with more. And so, Aaron, what's going on?
Well, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations in Geneva, Aviva Raz-Shechter, has addressed the United Nations, and she brought up a whole host of problems and complaints that she has regarding the agency's unyielding focus on Israel and biased focus on Israel. But she pointed to the UNHRC, the Human Rights Council, specifically, pointing their hypocrisies out.
What examples did she give?
Aside from the fact that the UNHRC's only permanent line item ever since its inception has been about Israel, and it continues to be a permanent line item, aside from that, Ambassador Shechter also made mention of how the body fails to recognize Palestinian abuses of human rights, fails to mention human rights abuses from other countries around the region, fails to acknowledge the positive things for human rights that Israel does, and they only focus on the negative. Just to clarify again, the UNHRC was created in 2006, and since then, in just a decade, they had 62 condemnations against Israel and none against any other country. And that was just in the first 10 years since its inception. So it's that kind of bias.
All right, well, let's take a look at your report for some more details.
All right. Israel's ambassador to the UN in Geneva has just delivered a fiery speech slamming the International Council for decades of alleged prejudice.
The continuous discrimination against Israel in the Human Rights Council, embodied in the infamous Item 7, and the unparalleled number of one-sided bias and political resolutions adopted regularly by the automatic majority of its members testify not only to the unfair treatment of the State of Israel, but also to the deficiencies of the Council itself and its agenda.
This echoes similar criticisms from the Israeli leaders, who say that the United Nations has historically made unfair resolutions against Israel, while failing to pass even a single resolution on other far more pressing global concerns. The Human Rights Council has been historically critical of Israel's occupation of the West Bank, its treatment of Palestinians under occupation, and the state's continued construction of settlements. But as Israel's ambassador pointed out, the Council has overlooked Israel's numerous contributions to human rights as the Middle East's only democracy, including rights for women, LGBTQ rights, and religious freedom. Many feel that this comes at a time when Israel and the U.S. are increasingly finding themselves isolated from the rest of the international community, which means these words may ultimately only land on deaf ears.
The Trump administration has frozen nearly half of its funding to the UN's Agency for Palestinian Refugees and has just cut another $45 million intended for Palestinian food aid. Though other nations are stepping in to fill this gap, the head of UNRWA in Gaza says the humanitarian crisis will soon become catastrophic.
But my message has been very clear. The schools will remain open, the clinics will remain open, and we have had, with examples that you gave, Belgium, Switzerland, Sweden and others, who have advanced their money. This will give us a little bit of time to protect the staff, to also look at new options and new solutions, to create this kind of a campaign, but also to contact states and find new alliances. We need a bit of time, and donors are helping us on this. But of course, the reduction is a very severe one. It's abrupt and it's harmful. And the world has to ask itself this question: does the Middle East need more instability?
Despite this danger, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has praised the United States for slashing its funds to UNRWA, accusing the agency of shielding terror activity against the Jewish state for years. President Trump first threatened to cut this aid after the Palestinians refused to accept the U.S. as a negotiator in the peace process. But the Palestinians point out that they only did so because of Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, instead of leaving it between Israel and the Palestinians to decide for themselves. Palestinian officials are also condemning Trump for allegedly putting lives at risk with these cuts as a response to the fallout from his announcement. Belgium was the first nation to step in to help fill the financial gap, pledging $23 million to the aid agency. But UNRWA has already begun laying off hundreds of aid workers as a result of the U.S.'s decision. Meanwhile, in an apparent rebuke to the vice president's visit to Israel, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas has just made a trip of his own. Abbas has just spoken to the Council of European Foreign Diplomats, who say that despite Trump's Jerusalem declaration, the EU still backs East Jerusalem as the proposed capital of a future Palestinian state. ILTV's Aaron Porras is here. And Aaron, what does this mean for the future of the peace process?
So it means a few different things. So let's kind of split this up and tackle all the aspects that you just discussed. So we have, first of all, the recognition of East Jerusalem as a future capital of a Palestinian state in the future. Again, there was at no point any refusal to acknowledge the possibility of that happening. So that really doesn't change much of anything. Aside from that, Abbas's intended goal wasn't, however, to get Jerusalem back only. It was really to get as many EU countries to unilaterally recognize Palestine as possible, as well as to ideally replace the United States as a peace partner in negotiations. Well, there are a few countries that have recognized Palestine in the past from the EU, but after this latest trip, very few are following suit. And as far as replacing the United States, the EU's response has been essentially just a flat-out no. Saying that even if we reduce the involvement of the United States, they are an inextricable partner in the peace process. So, really just the boycott then, if we move forward, the boycott of Hamas and Abbas and all the Palestinian factions of the United States is just putting them in a worse position in terms of future negotiations.
All right, well, let's check out your report for some more details.
ومع كل التقدير والاحترام لمواقف أوروبا التي نعتبرها صديقا أو شريكا حقيقيا للسلام في الشرق الأوسط، فإننا طالبنا ونطالب هذه الدول بأن تعترف بدولة فلسطين. إن الاعتراف لن يكون عقبة في طريق المفاوضات للوصول إلى سلام.
This visit to the EU comes at a critical crossroads for the Palestinians, who say they will no longer accept the United States as an impartial negotiator to the Middle East peace. Many believe Abbas's meeting with European leaders is an attempt to fill this gap in the peace process. And while 9 EU nations do already officially recognize Palestinian statehood, others are still unsure if the time is right.
We recommitted ourselves to our united, consolidated position in favor of two-state solution with Jerusalem as capital of both. And we reaffirmed, and I was glad to see that the Palestinian side was agreeing with that, we reaffirmed our conviction that the framework has to be multilateral. And so we will continue to work within the quartet, which means with our partners, the United States, the United Nations and Russia, enlarging this to a few Arab countries and possibly to Norway.
But Abbas's speech to the EU does seem to accomplish at least some of the desired effect. Slovenia's foreign minister has announced that his country is ready and willing to recognize a Palestinian state, though it's unclear if more EU nations will follow. They have agreed to unconditionally back East Jerusalem as the capital of said future Palestinian state, which certainly puts them at odds with current United States and Israeli plans. With the Palestinians literally shutting down much of East Jerusalem and the West Bank in protest of Vice President Pence's mere presence in Jerusalem, many worry that direct negotiations are further off than ever before.
2 Palestinian assailants have just been neutralized after they attempted to stab West Bank border police near the Tapuach Junction. The 16-year-old attackers were identified as being from the West Bank city of Jenin, and they were shot down before they could injure anybody. Border police say the suspects were flagged to halt after they noticed their strange behavior. When they refused to stop, shots were fired into the air. At that point, one of the suspects drew a knife and rushed at the soldiers. The forces responded by firing at the legs of the assailants. Both received first aid at the scene and were evacuated to a hospital for further treatment. Well, the Knesset has just advanced yet another controversial bill known as the Moyson Bill. The legislation would limit the time and volume of the Muslim call to prayer, which is played 5 times a day from loudspeakers in mosques throughout Israel. There are currently 2 versions of the bill. One would block all public speaker systems used by any places of worship in Israel completely, and the other would only block them between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. Lawmakers say these are necessary solutions for Jewish citizens that live near Arab communities, who have often complained that the call blasted from loudspeakers is a public disturbance. Critics, however, have condemned this legislation for attacking the religious freedom of Muslims in Israel from practicing their faith. The Muslim call to prayer, summoned 5 times a day, is one of the religion's oldest and most sacred traditions. Arab members of the Knesset have fiercely opposed this legislation from the start, famously tearing up the bill when the Knesset passed its first reading last year. Jordan has also come forward calling the idea utterly discriminatory and saying that it violates Israel's obligations under international human rights, as well as the peace treaty Israel signed with Jordan. For some tourists, hearing the Muslim call to prayer while exploring Christian or Jewish sites in Israel is often a demonstration of the country's amazing coexistence. If the government does ultimately decide to silence the calls, this is surely only the beginning of the debate. Though things are cautiously calm for the moment along Israel's border with Lebanon, a spark is all it would take to ignite an all-out war. Hezbollah's military leader has just condemned Israel's reinforcement of its buffer wall along the border and has even accused Israel of trying to kill a Hamas operative in southern Lebanon with a car bomb just last week. ILTV's Brett Allen Smith is here with this story. Now, Brett, what is the latest from Hezbollah?
Well, as you said, right now things are more or less kind of calm on the Hezbollah front. Now, both their army and their military is still spread kind of thin from fighting the Islamic State in southern Lebanon. And with the Palestinian reconciliation deal still kind of up in the air, their strategy moving forward is a very big question mark. Now, what we have just gotten is a very big, fiery speech from Hezbollah's military leader, though it's really just kind of more of the same impassioned rhetoric we typically get.
Now, this car bombing happened a full week ago already, but
Sure.
Hamas immediately, and at the time, Hamas did immediately blame
Right.
Israel as soon as that happened. Israel shot down the rumors. Why is Hezbollah only speaking up now, a week later?
Well, look, you've got to understand these speeches are first and foremost a way to rally Hezbollah's base, and the topics usually they went all over the place. First, Nasrallah is accusing Israel of the car bombing. Then he's condemning Israel for reinforcing the border wall. Then he's denying U.S. reports of drug trafficking, and then he's slamming Lebanon for screening the new Spielberg movie in theaters. Now, I know talking about a movie seems really silly, but remember, Hezbollah is a critical part of the Lebanese parliament, and these speeches are sometimes less for Israeli ears and more for the Lebanese public, as you'll see now in the rest of my report. Hezbollah military leader Hassan Nasrallah has addressed the masses with the usual fiery rhetoric, but this time he's taken dead aim on several recent developments, ranging from assassination attempts to Hollywood movies.
وكل المؤشرات حتى الآن تقول أن العدو الإسرائيلي هو الذي قام بتنفيذ هذه العملية، يعني التفجير الذي استهدف أحد الإخوة من كوادر حماس في مدينة صيدا.
Blaming Israel for last week's car bombing isn't unusual. The IDF doesn't comment on foreign reports like these, but Israeli leaders have coyly suggested that if Israel were behind the attack, it would not have ended with the target merely lightly wounded. Israeli Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman has also pointed out that, quote, every day in the Middle East there are dozens of explosions that they try and pin on Israel, so let's not react to this too seriously, end quote. Nasrallah has also condemned Lebanon's decision to reverse a ban on Steven Spielberg's latest film, The Post. Censors originally blacklisted The Post because Spielberg shot part of his Oscar-winning film Schindler's List in Israel, but Lebanese Prime Minister Saad Hariri personally stepped in to override the ban and put The Post back in cinemas. But an interesting detail in Nasrallah's speech was his denial of U.S. reports accusing the terror group of trafficking drugs.
أن هذه افتراءات واتهامات ظالمة ولا تستند إلى أي وقائع وليس لها أي حقيقة. حزب الله فيما يتعلق بهذا الأمر له موقف ديني وشرعي وأخلاقي واضح جدا. عندنا الاتجار بالمخدرات حرام وممنوع.
The White House apparently believes there's enough evidence to place Hezbollah behind the illegal trade of drugs. The Trump administration has just assigned a special team to investigate the matter.
A growing voice of protest is speaking out against the government's controversial plan to deport nearly 40,000 asylum seekers from Africa in Israel, or else put them in jail indefinitely. El Al pilots are refusing to fly deported Africans to Rwanda, and Holocaust survivors are saying they'll hide asylum seekers in their homes to fight the government's plan. These are just a few of the voices condemning the Israeli Prime Minister's promise to begin the deportations in just 2 months. Right-wing members of the Israeli government have branded this community as illegal infiltrators, but the majority, who come from Eritrea and Sudan, say they escaped war, genocide, and mandatory service in a slave army as refugees. Netanyahu's plan to deport thousands of asylum seekers back to Africa is something virtually unheard of in nearly every other developed country. That's because it often leads to horrific stories of torture, extortion, and human trafficking. Last week, an Eritrean man in Israel committed suicide in an apparent attempt to escape such a fate. Thousands of asylum seekers have just protested outside of Rwanda's embassy here in Israel, joined by Israeli Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike.
We are not the crime makers. We are people as everyone in the world. And we are requesting just to live as a people until our country gets the freedom.
Several Holocaust survivors have joined this struggle, vowing to hide asylum seekers in their homes to keep them safe. 73-year-old Veronica Cohen, who survived the Nazi extermination of Hungary's Jews, has perhaps said it best. I always asked myself, what would I have done if during the Holocaust I was on the other side? Would I have been strong enough to do what the righteous among the nations did? I feel that to do this is my humanitarian duty.
Israel's embassy in Amman is set to reopen after nearly half a year of frozen relations, which means diplomacy with Jordan is finally getting back to normal. One of the biggest hurdles in clearing things up, though, was whether or not Israel would prosecute the embassy guard who killed 2 Jordanians during an attempted terror attack last summer. ILTV's Brett Allen Smith is here in the studio with the latest developments on this. Brett?
Thank you, Aaron. Well, originally, Jordan was extremely adamant that Israel pursue a total investigation, legal action, everything against this guard. They've now kind of backed away from that, and they're saying that although they originally said that they wanted legal action, Israeli officials speaking under anonymity have now said that there will be no investigation, no litigation at all. They're saying, quote, no way will it happen.
All right, well, so how did Jordan take it? Because I bet not lightly.
Well, actually, there's been no official comments so far, but when the official word came in about the rebuilding of ties and the reopening of the embassy yesterday, that kind of was an interesting hint about what was going to happen, because when that statement went, Jordan said Israel will pursue litigation as we asked.
Right.
Israel's response was, we will say
Not a
when,
chance.
if we decide when we'll do it. And they didn't comment on that now. They're not going to comment on it then. They're probably not now.
It's safe to assume it's probably not going to happen.
Probably not. I think people are happy enough that the bridge is kind of rebuilt by now, as we'll see now in the rest of the report.
All right.
Israel has offered an official apology to the victims' families, along with a reported $5 million cash payment in order to rebuild ties with Jordan. Diplomacy with its neighbor is of critical importance to both nations. Jordan and Israel cooperate on everything from security to tourism to restoring the Dead Sea, making these last 6 months a long and anxious chapter. Jordan had previously demanded Israel pursue legal action against the embassy guard at the center of the incident last summer. That guard allegedly shot and killed a Jordanian man who had tried to stab him with a screwdriver, accidentally killing an innocent Jordanian citizen in the crossfire. That episode sparked a tense 24-hour standoff, followed by the immediate closure of Israel's embassy until Israel agreed to prosecute the guard, but apparently Jordan has backed off this point. Israeli officials have confirmed that the embassy guard will definitely not face charges for the killings. Netanyahu hailed the man as a hero upon his safe return from Jordan last summer. At the time, Jordanian officials were outraged over the warm public embrace of a man who'd allegedly killed an innocent civilian, even if it was by accident. But clearly time, and money perhaps, has helped calm the waters.
Dozens of women have just marched for gender equality all over the United States for the annual Women's March. The first march was held last year to protest the election of current United States President Donald Trump. But this year, Palestinian groups have actually decided to boycott the march in LA because of its featured speaker, actress Scarlett Johansson. The Palestinian American Women's Association claims that Johansson's, quote, unapologetic support of illegal settlements in the West Bank contradict the march's message. Several other leading Palestinian groups seem to agree, boycotting the march because of Johansson's selection as a key event speaker. Now, this all stems from the celeb's former position as a spokeswoman for SodaStream, whose main factory used to be located in the West Bank, though it has since relocated to Israel's southern Negev. Ironically, though, Johansson split from the SodaStream company quite some time ago, and the current factory actually employs nearly 500 Arab Bedouin. So it's unclear why these Palestinian groups still felt the need to boycott. For the large part, women everywhere are applauding Johansson's courageous participation in the march. On stage, she called out current Oscar frontrunner James Franco, who wore a, quote, Time's Up pin as he took the Best Actor award at Golden Globes, while facing numerous allegations of his own sexual misconduct.
Israel has destroyed 3 terror tunnels from Gaza in as many months. These are typically top-secret army operations carried out under intense secrecy. But now, for the first time, the army has opened a demolished terror tunnel for display, offering a glimpse of what Israel is capable of. This tunnel was identified and destroyed last October thanks to new cutting-edge Israeli tech. The army believes this latest defense will be the end of terror tunnels like these in the very near future.
The obstacle being built is another layer of security, that is the hard part of security, which will be basically a concrete wall, a deep underground concrete wall, which will be a hard barrier and very difficult to tunnel through. Not impossible, but very difficult to tunnel through, and that will also provide us a basis for our defenses, in addition to other components of that same defense system. Some of them we can speak about, and some of them we cannot speak about.
12 members of the Islamic Jihad terror cell were killed in the blast last October, placing new pressure on the Gaza-Israel border. An unusually massive tunnel built by Hamas was also detected and destroyed earlier this month. That tunnel's sophistication, as well as the fact that it reached all the way from Egypt into Israel, proved Hamas was intent on funneling millions into the tunnel project. The IDF believes the terror group will be forced to adopt new strategies given Israel's efficiency in destroying tunnels. So even if Hamas seems quiet for now, they're likely planning their next deadly move. That's it for this week's Roundup. Tune in next Friday for our next episode of This Week in Israel. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us from Tel Aviv.